The scorching summer heat was unbearable, the kind that sticks to your skin and permeates every part of your body. Our backyard pool sparkled like an oasis beneath the blazing sun, offering a promise of relief. It was the middle of July, and the house felt quieter than usual, a kind of stillness that wasn't entirely comfortable. My mom had left town 2 days earlier to visit her parents, leaving my dad and me to take care of the house, and, for the most part, each other. Normally, this arrangement would have been straightforward. We had an unspoken understanding. He stayed in his office, consumed by work, while I secluded myself in my room, passing the time with books, social media, or daydreaming about life at college. But this time, something felt off. There was a certain energy about Dad that I couldn't quite pinpoint. That morning, I woke to the unexpected smell of freshly cooked bacon and eggs, a surprising gesture from someone who rarely entered the kitchen. "Breakfast is ready," he called out, his voice unusually upbeat. I made my way downstairs, half expecting a joke or some hidden motive, but instead, he greeted me with a warm smile and a plate of food. "You need to eat something," he insisted, sliding the plate toward me. "Big day ahead. Any plans?" I shrugged, mumbling something about lounging by the pool. My dad wasn't one for small talk, so this sudden interest in my day caught me off guard. "Not really," I replied. "Maybe I'll swim later." "Good idea," he said, filling his coffee cup. "It's too hot to stay cooped up inside." The conversation fizzled out, as usual, and I retreated to the backyard for some solitude. The pool was my sanctuary, a place where I could escape not just the oppressive heat, but also the uncomfortable silences that filled our home. I stretched out on a lounge chair, letting the warmth of the sun gently lull me into a light doze. About an hour later, I was startled by the sound of the sliding glass door opening. Dad stepped outside, carrying a tray with 2 glasses of lemonade, dressed in swim trunks with a towel draped over his shoulder. "You can't hog the pool all to yourself," he said with a grin, setting the tray on the small table next to my chair. I smiled back, taking one of the glasses he offered. The lemonade was icy and refreshing, a welcome break from the heat. We exchanged a few words about the weather, the quietness of the house without Mom, and my upcoming college plans. It was one of those rare moments when he seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. After a few minutes, he set his glass down and dove into the pool, making a splash as he broke the stillness of the water. I watched him swim a few laps, his movements smooth and deliberate. It had been years since I'd seen him so relaxed, almost carefree. "Come on in," he called out, his voice bouncing off the water. "It's perfect in here." I hesitated, but the allure of cool water was too much to resist. I slipped off my cover-up and eased into the pool, the shock of the cold water sending a shiver through me. We started tossing a beach ball back and forth, laughing as we tried to outdo each other with trick shots. For a while, it felt like the walls that had formed between us over the years were starting to crumble. I saw glimpses of the dad I remembered from childhood, the one who used to play catch with me in the yard and tell me bedtime stories. But as the afternoon wore on, the atmosphere began to change. At first, it was subtle. His jokes became a little too personal, his compliments lingering a bit too long. "You've really grown up," he said at one point, his voice softer than usual. I laughed nervously, trying to brush off the comment. "Yeah, I guess so." But his gaze didn't waver, and a strange tension settled over the moment. He swam closer, his eyes scanning my face as though searching for something. "You remind me so much of your mom," he said, his tone almost wistful. The knot in my stomach tightened. "Thanks," I mumbled, looking away. The sun was high above, its rays glistening off the water, but the warmth that had felt comforting earlier now felt suffocating. I tried to think of an excuse to leave, but before I could, Dad reached out and touched my arm. His grip was light, almost tentative, but it was enough to make me freeze. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice low and serious. I blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift in his demeanor. "What is it?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. He hesitated, his hand lingering on my arm. "I don't want you to think this is wrong," he began, his words faltering and unsure. I instinctively pulled away, my mind racing to process what was happening. "Dad, what are you talking about?" His eyes met mine, and there was something in them I couldn't quite place, something that made my skin crawl. "You're not a little girl anymore," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The tension in the air became palpable, a suffocating weight pressing down on me. I tried to understand my dad's words, but my mind was racing, desperately seeking a logical explanation. Yet, everything within me screamed that something was terribly off. I don't quite get what you're saying, I said, my voice shaky despite my effort to sound composed. He smiled, but it wasn't the warm, comforting smile I was familiar with. This one was different, subtle, almost predatory. I just mean you've changed so much, he said, his tone soft but unsettling. You're confident, beautiful. You're not a little girl anymore. A knot formed in my stomach, tightening painfully. Thanks, I stammered, shifting uneasily in the water. The pool, once a place of refuge, now felt like a trap. The glistening surface seemed to mock me, its cool touch offering no solace. Dad swam closer, moving deliberately, almost like a predator circling its prey. You remind me so much of your mom when we first met, he continued, his voice low but unnervingly intimate. She had the same sparkle in her eyes, the same grace in the way she carried herself. I forced a laugh, trying to ease the tension. Okay, that's nice, but maybe we should get out of the pool. It's getting late. I glanced at the pool's edge, calculating the quickest way to leave without drawing attention. He tilted his head, studying me as though I were a puzzle he was determined to solve. Why the rush? We're just talking. It's been so long since we've had a conversation like this. I hesitated, glancing at the edge again. Yeah, but I'm getting hungry. Maybe I'll make us some lunch, I said, though my mind was screaming to escape. Before I could move, he reached out and lightly placed his hand on my shoulder. The touch, though gentle, felt like a chain anchoring me in place. Stay, he said, his voice steady but firm. There's something I need to tell you. Panic surged through me, my heartbeat quickening as my chest tightened. What is it? I whispered, my voice barely audible. He paused, as if wrestling with his thoughts, before continuing. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, he said, his eyes locked on mine. About life, about what it really means to connect with someone. A chill crawled up my spine despite the warmth of the sun. Okay, and? I asked, my voice trembling. And I realized something, he said, his voice softening. Sometimes the people we're meant to connect with aren't who we expect. His words hung in the air, dark and heavy with meaning. I swallowed, feeling a lump in my throat. Dad, my voice faltered. I don't understand what you're trying to say. He sighed deeply, the sound heavy and weary, as though it came from the depths of his soul. You're so much like your mom, he repeated, his gaze distant. But there's something more, something I can't ignore. My chest constricted, each breath becoming harder as his words sank in. This isn't right, I stammered, stepping back. He closed the distance, his expression unreadable. You don't need to be scared, he said, his tone soothing, but there was something darker in it. I just want to talk, that's all. But it wasn't just talking. I could feel it in the way his eyes lingered on me, in the way his hand reached out, as though trying to bridge a gap that should never exist. Panic exploded inside me, adrenaline flooding my system as I scrambled for an excuse. I need to go, I blurted out, my voice cracking. I just remembered I have a call with a friend. He frowned, his brow furrowing in frustration. Why are you so eager to leave? I'm just trying to talk. It's not that, I lied, my heart racing in my chest. Sure he could hear it. I forgot. I made plans. For a moment, he looked at me, his expression shifting between disappointment and something I couldn't quite place. Then, as if a switch had flipped, his demeanor softened. Okay, he said, stepping back. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. As I climbed out of the pool, I felt his gaze on me, heavy, like a physical presence pressing against my back. I grabbed my towel, wrapping it tightly around myself, and hurried inside. Once safely in my room, I locked the door behind me and collapsed onto my bed, trembling. My mind replayed everything, over and over, trying to make sense of it. Was I overreacting? Misinterpreting his intentions? Or was there something deeper? Something I wasn't ready to face? The rest of the day, I avoided him. I stayed in my room, pretending to be busy with texts and calls that didn't exist. Every time I heard his footsteps outside my door, my heart would leap into my throat. I didn't know how to confront him, or if I should. That night, as I lay in bed, I could feel the weight of his presence, lingering in the silence. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that things were far from over. The tension, the unsaid words, the way he had looked at me, it all stayed with me, like a shadow that wouldn't disappear. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy sense of unease weighing on me. The events from the previous day played over in my mind, each thought making the discomfort harder to shake. I told myself it was just a bad dream, that I had misunderstood, that maybe I was the one causing the awkwardness. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. The house felt unnervingly still as I walked into the kitchen. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee hung in the air, but Dad wasn't in his usual place at the table. I felt a brief moment of relief at his absence, grateful for the quiet to collect my thoughts. As I poured myself a glass of orange juice, I heard footsteps behind me, my body stiffened instinctively, and I turned to see him standing in the doorway. He was already dressed, his hair neatly combed, and his face was unreadable. "Good morning," he said, his voice casual, as if nothing unusual had occurred. "Morning," I replied, keeping my tone even, busying myself with breakfast. He walked over to the coffee pot and poured himself a cup. For a few seconds, we stood in silence, the air thick with unspoken tension. Then he broke it. "We need to talk about yesterday," he began, his voice careful. My heart skipped a beat. "What about it?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant. He took a sip of his coffee, his gaze fixed on the counter. "I think we need to clear the air. I didn't mean to make you feel uncomfortable." I exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief and anxiety washing over me. "It's fine," I said quickly, hoping to end the conversation. "Let's just forget about it." But he wouldn't drop it. "No, it's not fine," he insisted. I don't want you to get the wrong idea." "What idea would that be?" I asked, my voice sharper than I had meant. He looked at me then, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place, regret, guilt, or something darker. I feel like we don't talk enough. Like there's a distance between us that I want to fix." I stared at him, trying to gauge his sincerity. Part of me wanted to believe him, to accept that his intentions were genuine, that I had blown everything out of proportion. But another part of me, the part that remembered his lingering gaze and the way he had touched my arm, wasn't so sure. "We can talk," I said cautiously, "but yesterday felt strange." He nodded, his expression softening. "I know. I didn't mean for it to feel that way. I guess I'm just not great at expressing myself." I wanted to trust him, to push away the unease that had settled in my chest. But as the day wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He was too attentive, too present, always finding excuses to be near me. By late afternoon, I had had enough. I grabbed my phone and texted my best friend, Lauren, asking if I could come over. She replied almost immediately, saying I could come anytime. "I'm going to Lauren's," I told Dad as I grabbed my keys. He looked up from the book he was reading, his brow furrowing. "I thought we could have dinner together," he said. "Maybe another time," I replied, heading for the door. The drive to Lauren's house was a blur, my mind racing with everything I had been trying to push aside. When I arrived, she greeted me with her usual bright smile, but her face quickly shifted to concern when she saw my expression. "What's wrong?" she asked, pulling me into a hug. I hesitated, unsure how to put my feelings into words. "It's my dad," I finally said. "He's been acting strange." "Strange how?" she pressed, leading me to the couch. I told her everything from the pool incident to the morning conversation, leaving nothing out. Lauren listened attentively, her expression growing more serious with each detail. "That's not normal," she said firmly when I finished. "You need to set boundaries," she continued. "Tell him he's making you uncomfortable." "I don't know if I can," I admitted. "What if I'm just overreacting?" "You're not," she replied, her voice steady. "Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is." Her words stayed with me as I drove home that night, a mix of determination and fear churning inside me. When I walked through the door, the house was dark, except for the faint glow of the TV in the living room. Dad was sitting on the couch, his face illuminated by the flickering light. "You're back late," he said, his tone neutral. "I told you I was going to Lauren's," I replied, keeping my distance. He nodded, his gaze lingering on me for a moment before he turned back to the TV. "I hope you had a good time." I hesitated, then said, "We need to talk." He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "About what?" About yesterday and today, and how you've been acting. His eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't interrupt. I took a deep breath. You're making me uncomfortable, I said bluntly. The way you've been talking to me, looking at me, it's not okay. For a moment, he didn't say anything. His face remained calm, but then he sighed. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I didn't mean to make you feel that way. I miss your mom, and sometimes I don't know how to deal with it. His words caught me off guard, softening some of the anger that had been building inside me. I get that, I said, my voice gentler. But you can't treat me like a replacement. It's not fair. You're right, he admitted, his shoulders slumping. I'll do better. I promise. I wanted to believe him, for the sake of our family. I needed to believe him. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over.